Hi guys, welcome to today's video. In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to be making resin shaker notebooks. So I realized that the previous video I posted was quite short and it didn't really throw much light on the entire process you are going to go through when making this notebook. And then also, if you know you haven't subscribed, please remember to do so. We are going to be posting so many tips and tricks as time goes on. So first of all, you're going to need your molds, your cups, your mixing sticks, or your silicone spatulas to begin. And then we're definitely going to be needing the stars of the show. When I say the stars of the show, I mean the resin and the hardener. So here I'm pouring in some 2-to-1 resin. I'm pouring in 100 ml of the 2-to-1 resin. So if you hear 2-to-1 resin, anytime you hear 2-to-1 resin, it means that you're going to be pouring 2 times more for the resin and then just half the quantity for the hardener. So for here, I bought 100 ml of resin. So half of that 100 ml is going to be what? 50 ml for the hardener. So it's as simple as that. It's not so much difficult. So I did pour my 100 ml of resin, and then this is me now pouring in the hardener, which is just going to be around 50 ml, and then I'm going to start to mix from there. So you'll notice that immediately I added in the hardener, the resin became foggy. You see that? And then while you keep mixing, you can clearly tell that it is not clear as water, it is foggy. So you're just going to mix till it clears out like this. Normally mixing will take about 5 minutes, but I always advise that if you're working with clear resin from O-Celle crafts, you should try as much as possible to mix for 10 minutes. So after the mixing was done, I got some extra silicone caps for getting the different portions of resin based on the colors I was working on. So anytime you're working on a resin project, if you are working on, let's say, 2 colors, you divide the resin into 2, or you pour 2 portions. If you're working on 5, you get 5 portions. If you're working on 4, you get 4 portions. That way each color is going to be poured into each and every single one of them. Okay, I mean each color will get its own portion. So once that was done, I realized there were some bubbles at the top of the resin, so I went ahead to use my lighter to pop it, and that was when I added in my pigment. So this one here I'm working with is translucent pigment. Translucent pigment gives the resin this kind of see-through effect, meaning after it has been mixed into the resin, you'll be able to still see through the resin. It gives it this kind of glass effect. So you can even tell here, just dropped in the pigment and mixed, and you can see the effect it's giving the resin. So when you add in your pigments, you don't need to mix too long or for too long. You just have to mix it in till it is evenly distributed inside the resin you are working with. So for the second portion, I wanted to work with this shade of gold chunky glitter so that it will match perfectly well with the translucent pigments that I selected. So just get a reasonable quantity, or the quantity you want to work with. It just shouldn't be too much, and you just proceed to mix. It's as simple as that. You realize all these mixing and measurements, they are not so much. It's just something simple, and you should just try and awaken the artist in you at times. Yes. So once I did the mixing, I got it in there properly and went on to pouring. So for the pouring stage, there are not so many rules about the pouring. You're basically just going to pour based on the pattern that you're trying to create. Okay, so for me, I wanted the translucent pigment to be at the top half of the notebook I was working on, and I wanted the chunky glitter to be at the bottom. So that is exactly what I did. So you're just going to try as much as possible to pour it in that order. Okay, and then mind you, at times working on a project is not really going to give you this perfect outcome. Okay, so at a point in time, some of the pigments or some of the glitters do leak or move into the other place where you do not want it to be. So I did the same for the second notebook. I poured the chunky glitter portion at the bottom half of the notebook mold, and then I poured the translucent pigment at the top half. So you also realize here that the holes for adding the sheets to the notebook covers are all on one side. Whenever you are working on shaker notebook molds, always try as much as possible to just position the molds this very way I have done here in the video. So you realize the chunky glitter I was working with ran out. So I just went ahead to remix another portion and then continued with the project. So I poured the translucent at the top like I did for the first cover, and that was it. So if you look again at the first cover, you realize that some of the chunky glitter has leaked or has floated onto the surface of the other parts that I didn't want it to be. So you just go and get rid of that. So I used the lighter to pop some bubbles from the surface, and that was it for the pouring stage. So you're going to leave this for about 24 hours. The timing basically depends on the brand of resin you're working with, so always check the label and work with that time. So this is how it looks. So it has cured. When I say cure, I mean it has hardened. Okay, so the curing stage basically defines the hardening of the resin piece. It has hardened as I wanted to, and now we're moving on to demolding it from the piece. When I say demolding, you're basically taking it out of the mold that was used to make it. So you can clearly tell how perfect the finish is. So demolding is actually going to take a minute, so you're just going to have to take your time to demold it from the mold without ripping it at any point. So yes, this is it after the demolding process was done. You can tell how clear and shiny it is, and it's very translucent as well. You are going to get this effect only if you work with the right type of resin. Some resins out there on the market do not give the best effects that you'll be looking for. So let's move on to demolding the back cover of the notebook. One other thing I almost forgot to mention is that not every type of resin pigment is going to give you this translucent effect. Okay, there are actually different types of resin pigments out there on the market, and each and every single type gives its own unique effect. So the one that was used here for this project is the translucent resin pigment. Okay, that's the one that is going to give you this kind of glass effect. So please be sure not to make any mistake about that. So next I moved on to picking the fillings for the resin shaker notebook. The first one was the glass beads for the shakers, and this one here is a polymer clay slice. Polymer clay slices come in different shapes, colors, forms, designs, what have you. The first one was the ribbon shape. This one here is the Mickey Mouse head shape. Some have the shape of fruit slices. This one here is the flower slices. And then not only resin artists use these are also used by lip gloss producers and so many other crafters out there on the market. So you basically have to select whatever it is that you want to put into your shaker, and you don't necessarily have to use the same things I'm using. You can either choose to use glitters or anything, basically anything that can be used as a shaker, anything that would be pleasing to you, or anything that is going to bring out the design you have in mind is still perfect enough once it's going to be okay in the liquid. So I use this little spoon to scoop the glass beads into the cavity of the notebook, and I did the same for the other polymer clay slices I had pre-selected for the fillings of the shaker notebook. So the quantity you are going to need for the shaker book is based on the design you are trying to create. There are no rules around that as well. So you just try as much as possible not to overdo, but to try as much as possible again to just create a beautiful piece at the end of the project. So once that was out of the way, we are going to proceed to peeling off the protective film on the acrylic sheet we were going to use to seal the cavity of the shaker notebook. So one thing about these acrylic films or sheets is that for any shaker mold or shaker piece, acrylic films are actually prepared based on the shape of the cavity so that you can easily cover it up and then seal it and then fill it with the liquid for the shaker. So once I was done with that, I hurriedly rushed to put on some gloves because I didn't want to end up having fingerprints on the surface of the acrylic film while taking off the protective wrapping. One thing about taking off this acrylic protective wrapping is that it's actually very satisfying. So yes, after that was done, I was ready to place the heart-shaped acrylic sheet or film over the heart-shaped cavity of this A7 shaker notebook. Next, we are going to line the edges of the heart shape of this notebook with UV resin. So the role of the UV resin here is that we are going to use it as an adhesive. The reason why we are using UV resin for this is that UV resin actually takes a matter of 5 to 10 minutes to cure or to harden when exposed to UV rays from either the sun or the UV lamp. And because this project is time bound, we really needed to use the UV resin to get it done as quickly as possible. So I lined the edges of the heart-shaped shaker parts of the notebook with the UV resin. Made sure I covered all the edges before I placed the acrylic film on it again. So once it was placed on it, I exposed it to sunlight. I left it to sit for some time. Because it was during the day, it just cured as soon as possible. So this is how the piece looks once the UV resin had cured at the tip of the acrylic film. You can see clearly that it was possible for me to shake the contents of the shaker without it spilling or falling out. So that's the role of the UV resin. Now we are going to use the baby oil and then the syringe for the next part of the project. So we are going to use the syringe to draw a fair quantity or a fair amount of baby oil. So this is me opening the cap of the baby oil bottle and then just putting in the syringe to draw a fair quantity for the project. Working with a syringe to draw baby oil is quite difficult because the baby oil is very viscous or very thick, so it's going to need a little bit of determination. But once you draw the quantity the syringe can take, then you can proceed to push it into the cavity created for the shaker. So we're going to continue this process over and over again till we get a fair quantity or a fair amount within the cavity. And then whenever you are filling the cavity of a shaker mold, you are not supposed to completely fill the whole thing to the brim. You are supposed to leave enough air space. That is what is going to give it the kind of effect we are looking for. That is what is going to give you the opportunity or the chance to be able to shake the piece and see it rise and fall from one point to the other. So once that's done, you're going to use some wet wipes to clean off any spilled oil on the surface of the notebook cover. And then you're going to use the UV resin, just a little drop of it at the corner where there was the hole for filling the shaker cavity. And then you are going to leave that for it to dry under the UV lamp or under the sunlight. So this is what you're going to get once you're able to seal that hole. You can see here clearly that I didn't fill the cavity to the brim. I left a little space and it's giving it that very beautiful bouncy effect. So this is the kind of effect that we are looking for. And it's so beautiful, so pretty. This is so easy to do. You don't really need to be an expert in resin art before you can recreate this piece here. And then one thing about learning an art like resin art is that you should always have the materials you need with you and practice while you are watching these tutorials. It makes it very easy to be able to recreate these pieces with ease. So once that's done, we are going to dome the surface of this notebook. So if you look at the edges where the cavity is, you realize that you can clearly see that it is not totally part of the notebook. It doesn't look natural. It doesn't look like it's part of the notebook. And UV resin, even though it was lined at the edges, anything can happen and it can just fall out. So before we dome, you're going to need this top bond glue. You can get it in any hardware store. So this glue, one reason why we are using this glue is it peels when it is applied onto a smooth surface, peels when it dries, and that is going to give us a very nice finish, because when we are doming one surface of a notebook or one end of a resin piece, when the liquid spills, which is very natural, when the resin spills and moves onto the other surface, it's just going to destroy the design at that side of the notebook. And because we do not want to get that effect, we want to be able to peel it when it does, okay? But because resin hardens and cures and forms a solid plastic, we can't peel it naturally. So we will need to put the top bond glue on the surface of the notebook. I mean the opposite surface, okay? The surface opposite to wherever you are going to be pouring the doming liquid. So that when it dries, you're going to dome on the other end. And when the resin moves to that side, it will just be peeled off without having any issues, okay? So you can either use your hands, you can use a brush, as in a paint brush, or any other thing to apply a sufficient or a reasonable amount of top bond glue to the side you are not going to dome, okay? So you can see that I applied it to the entire back of the cover, and I also applied it to the edges of the notebook as well. So that is exactly what you are supposed to do. So you just make sure you apply enough on all edges or all sides that doesn't need to be domed with the surface, and then you are good to go. So you will leave this for it to dry. But the drying, you don't really have to expose it to sunlight. You just leave it to sit for some few minutes. So within a matter of 10 minutes, it would have dried. And then from there, you can turn the piece around again, mix enough resin and dome it. Okay. So after the top bond glue dries up, you're going to position some caps on a protected surface on which the notebook is going to sit. Okay, so you just need the piece you're going to dome to suspend. So this is how it looks after it had dried. So now we're going to position it on the table on the top of the caps. And now I'm going to mix some resin and hardener for the doming. Now, because I don't need too much of the resin and hardener to dome the surface of the notebook, I'm only going to pour 30 ml resin and then 15 ml hardener. Mind you, we are working with 2 to 1 resin, and with 2 to 1 resin, the 2 goes for the A, which is the resin, and the 1 goes for the hardener. In, in other words, you're going to pour half the quantity of whatever you pour for the resin for the hardener. Okay. So once that is done, once you're done pouring and measuring and everything, you're just going on to mix the resin. So when you're mixing your resin, you have to try as much as possible to mix in a single direction. Okay. And then immediately you start to mix, the resin begins to look foggy this way. Okay. The fogginess means the chemical reaction has started. But for us to be able to tell whether we've mixed properly, the resin has to look clear like water. Okay. So you're going to give it a good mix for a matter of 5 to 10 minutes, depending again on the brand of resin you are using. So for the crystal clear resin I'm using, I need to work with the resin has a working time of 40 minutes. So I can use 10 minutes of that to mix the resin up. Okay. Just to be very, very sure that I've mixed it properly. Because if the mixing isn't done too well, the curing will also be affected. And even at times it could even affect the effects or the quality. Yes, it can affect the quality of the turnout. Okay, meaning it won't be as glossy as it's supposed to be, and you really want to get a glossy surface at the end of the day. Okay, so you're going to give it a very good mix. You keep mixing, mixing, mixing till you're done, till it looks completely clear like water. Okay. Another sign is that when you begin to mix, while the resin looks foggy, you cannot really see the bottom of the mixing spatula or mixing stick you are using. Okay. You're not really able to see the bottom of it very well. But once it begins to clear out and you're able to see the bottom inside the liquid, then it means it's getting a good turn. Okay, it means the mixing is almost done. And also, depending on the quantity of resin you are working with, you should mix accordingly. Always scrape the sides of the cup and the bottom of the cup whenever you are mixing. Okay, because sometimes some of the chemicals do get attached to the sides. It does not get enough of the hardener, meaning you still get some parts of the liquid that you have mixed not reaching some of the hardener, meaning those parts are not well mixed, and it can also affect the quality of the turnout. Good. So once the mixing is done, you are going to move straight into pouring the resin onto the surface. Okay. So you're not going to pour too much of it, a little bit at a time. Then once you are done pouring the little quantity, you're going to use your spatula or your mixing stick to just spread it out. Okay. So all you're going to do is you're just going to spread it out onto the cover of the notebook. So you make sure you use a reasonable quantity of resin. A reasonable quantity of resin, not too much. Okay. So you just spread it out to get it to the edges and don't let it spill. Okay. So you spread it out with your popsicle stick, your mixing stick, your spatula, whatever it is that you're working with. And then if you're not so good or you're not so much of an expert, you can use toothpick at the sides or the edges of the notebook or whatever it is that you are doing. It makes it much easier. Okay. So once that is all done, you're going to leave this to sit for about 24 hours, depending on the type of resin you are working on. Some resins will take longer, some take 48, some even take 12. So you always have to work according to the type of resin that you are working with. Okay. So this is it after 24 hours. So at this point, all I'm going to do is to peel off the top bond glue from the back of the notebook cover. So you can even see traces of the resin being spilled over the parts that the top bond was applied on. And look how glossy the surface looks now. So for this part, I'm going to need a sharp tool. You can either use a needle or a toothpick. So I use my tweezers. I'm just going to poke a little part, and then you can tell right now, you can see that it's just going to come off easily. Okay, great. So you're just going to peel that off little by little, and then at the end of the day you realize that any resin that spills over to that end will just peel away with it. Okay, so you can tell over here right now that there was resin on that end, but once the top bond glue was peeled, it just peeled away with it, leaving a shiny surface for the notebook back. Good. So I'm just going to peel everything away, do the same to the edges and every other part the top bond was applied to. So this is actually a very good method if you do not want your resin piece to be destroyed during the doming process. So during the process of peeling the top bond glue from the surface it was applied on, some of the holes of the notebook still had some few marks that had to be gotten rid of. So I use this tool here. It's called the deburring tool. I just turned it around in there and then it just took away any little piece that was supposed to be trimmed. I also used it on the edges of the notebook just to trim off any little excess that the top bond glue couldn't get rid of. Okay, great. So once that was done, the next thing was to add the sheets to the notebook to complete the project for the day. Great. So for this size of notebook, you're just going to get the same size of sheets that is going to fit it perfectly well. So you're going to turn the notebook, you're going to turn it with the face or the top part facing downwards, and then we're going to add the back cover. So to be able to add the sheet to it, you're going to use this set of rings here called the binder ring. So if you look closely at it, you realize that one is at the top and then one is also at the bottom. Okay. So you're going to split it, you push it in the opposite direction to split, and immediately it splits, you're going to spread it apart. Okay. So that is how you open the binder rings. So we open all of the 3 rings for each of the sets, and then we are going to pass them through the holes for the notebook. Good. So this is me trying to position them perfectly well to make it easier to put them into the notebook holes. Good. So I'm going to start with the back cover, just going to place them down there perfectly well. Good. And then I'm going to move in with the sheets for the notebook. So this is the size for this notebook. It's A7 square refill sheets. I'm going to place those down as well, the sheets. You should just be very careful. Align the holes very well so you don't go through any stress. Once that is done, I'm going to put the front cover of the notebook on the opposite side of the rings before moving on to close the rings. Okay, so at this stage, you're just going to apply a little bit of pressure. You try and close all the rings very tightly. That way, the sheets will not come out at the end of the project. Okay, so it's as simple as that. You just make sure you get rid of all of that, and then you are good to go. So this is it after everything was done. Here I was trying to align the edges well, the edges of the binder ring well. And this is the notebook. You see how pretty the notebook is looking now. So look at how good the shaker is actually looking.
shake it. You can do so many things with this as well. Just imagine giving this to a little girl or a best friend or a close person. So this is how the entire book looks now. This is a very easy tutorial. You can do this from the comfort of your home, and always try as much as possible to practice while watching the tutorial. It makes it much easier for you to understand and for you to recreate the piece. That's it for this video. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and like this video for more tips and tricks like this one. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.